Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast, where we talk with business founders and leaders about their journeys, the highs, the lows, the challenges, and perhaps most importantly, the lessons learned along the way. My guest today is Roy Osing, a former company president, chief marketing officer, and entrepreneur who took a startup internet company to $1 billion in sales. Roy is the author of the bold and best-selling business series, Be Different or Be Dead. You bet I'll be asking him about that title, where he shares what he calls his audacious, unheard-of ways of achieving extraordinary growth. With more than 40 years of executive leadership experience, Roy has built his career around one central belief, that success doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from differentiation, execution, and audacity. In the first half of our conversation, we'll explore Roy's own entrepreneurial journey, how he led a company from startup to scale, the risks he took, and the lessons learned along the way. Then we'll dive into his Be Different or Be Dead philosophy, unpacking what it means to lead boldly, execute relentlessly, and build a culture that stands apart in a world of sameness. My conversation with Roy Osing begins right now. Stick around. Hey, Roy, welcome to the program. I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored that you are here. Tell me about that company that you helped take from startup to $1 billion. Whenever I say the word $1 billion, I always want to do the Austin Powers kind of $1 billion, But
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big number. Tell me about your experience there. What was the opportunity that you saw that maybe others didn't?
Well, it was actually back in the day. My background in business is telecommunications. And so the scene was the days where technology was changing really, really rapidly. Deregulation in Canada, and I know in the US at the same time, was changing rapidly. And we were presented with this new IP technology and with the question, how can we take advantage of it and grow the business as a result of applying it?
Was that the voice
So I
over
was
IP?
asked,
When you say IP technology,
yeah,
VoIP?
well, no, it's straight internet data,
Right. Oh,
particularly.
okay.
But
Gotcha.
yeah, and so we were already in the data business, but we catered more to business clients as opposed to residential. And I was asked to basically take and lead the business and see what we could do with it. And we did not start out with $1 billion as an objective, right? I mean, I get kind of goosebumps when I think about this. I mean, we just worked our buns off. And eventually, when we looked back, we said, wow, we took an early stage data company, and built $1 billion powerhouse. By the way, that business today, Mike, is $18 billion a year. It's
Wow.
huge. And we kind of like to think our team had a little bit of a role to play in that. So I was asked to do that, and we just started the journey of building a business and focusing on top line and doing all what I would call I call them audacious things. They're really different things that most people kind of like don't think will work because they're too simple. And we had a lot of fun along the way. And the people that I had were just amazing. And yeah, we built $1 billion a year business. I still can't believe it when I say it, but apparently we did.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest early challenges you faced during that growth phase, and how did you overcome them? And I ask that because the most challenging part of my business, which has been around for 33 years now, has been when we had rapid growth. That was harder than a decline in sales. It was so challenging in so many ways. What were some of your early challenges during that rapid growth expanse?
Yeah, I mean, our challenges were much more fundamental than that. I mean, you got to remember, we came out of a monopoly culture, okay, when we started to build this business. And so we had to change the culture away from monopoly thinking into competitive thinking. We needed to change it from engineering. No offense, engineers, I love you, but we had to get some marketing and customer service drivers in there. So we literally had to transform how people did their jobs and the skills and competencies that we needed in order to do that. Part of that was building an army of advocates in this organization to basically get behind the changes needed. Okay, because there was a ton of people who really didn't want to do this, who really didn't want this kind of like new business to succeed, quite frankly, because it was so different and it represented some fear and some risk. And so we faced some really fundamental things. But the one aspect of scaling that I learned really early is that it's not about cost. It's about top line revenue. And what you need to do is you need to grow top line revenue disproportionately quicker than the cost base. But you started off by looking at revenue. Okay, most people take the other approach. They look at ways of driving costs down. My philosophy has always been figure out the revenue line and then architect the cost structure to deliver to that revenue line in a way margins are big, right? And growth rates on the cost line are disproportionately less than revenue. And that was a big thing to get going. It's just focus, because what it required is faith that the medium to long term view of things like customer loyalty and premium pricing, they would yield revenues that would escalate much quicker than cost. And so it was one of those challenges that quite frankly existed for the entire time I was president of this company. I mean, people just kept coming back to, well, too risky. The other takeaway is, of course, if you're not taking risks, you're not doing anything. And so what the hell, right? So that was another major thing. And monopolists don't like to take risks, right? So
Right.
I was one of these guys that was kind of like, I was a maverick, contrarian, young executive that wanted to do things differently. And I know we're going to talk about be different or be dead later, but that fundamentally was a genesis of the whole be different or be dead thing and differentiation.
Quite the troublemaker, Roy.
I tried to be, quite
Well,
frankly.
as the author Jim Collins said, the enemy of great is good, and monopolies can be good. They don't need to be great because they're already a monopoly. What more business are they going to get by being great? And there is a certain element of security. I remember when our company finally started doing good. Maybe okay would be a better word, but for the sake of this, I'll say we were doing good. We had the potential to do great, but I was afraid to try and do great. I did not want to leave the security of good. It was so comfortable. It was so much better than, it was a nice warm bed versus sleeping under an overpass in a cardboard box. That's the difference in scale, it felt like. And I don't know. I think I was like, okay, why risk that? Why risk the safety of good for the uncertainty of great? But to your point, and we'll get into this, there's an element of risk when growing a business. And my experience with risk is, I started with probably what you had as well, which was the no guts, no glory, no pressure, no diamonds, no risk, no reward, all those different sayings associated with risk. I embraced every one of them. And thank God, because I would never have survived, particularly the early days, without audacious risk. And at some point, I had to throttle back the risk a little bit and be just a little bit more, not risk adverse, but risk savvy, right? And because, you keep betting the farm over and over and over again, and one day you're going to lose the farm. So at some point, I had to throttle that back. You describe your leadership style as audacious, which clearly is what I'm hearing and what I've read about you. Where did that confidence or willingness to take bold risks come from?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I stumbled on it the first time because I'm doing a lot of guesting on podcasts like yours and appreciate the opportunity to try and change the conversation. But the first time I was asked that, I actually had to take a bit of a step back and think about it. And I actually believe it came from my mother. My mother was one of 12 siblings. in Quebec, where she was born and raised. Didn't speak an ounce of French, but that's where she was from. In fact, she refused to speak French, to be honest.
She's the
Yeah,
one, the holdout.
she's the
Yes.
one, and she, I think, like as a kid growing up in that environment, she would describe it as like you literally had to fight for every meal. I mean, you had a lot of competitors sitting around the table wanting the same thing that your mother cooked as you do, and so the issue was, how can you get what you want off the table? And I never really thought about it then. But when I thought about it after people kept asking me, where did this come from? I honestly think that I inherited the gene from her that is completely dissatisfied with the status quo, always looking for opportunities to create discontinuity, always fighting with passion for what you want. Um, and on the goodness side, okay, like I'm not talking about narcissism. A lot of people think the whole notion of be different is about being narcissistic, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It's doing things in a unique way that other people care about. So you can't be any more people centric than trying to achieve that. And sometimes that's really difficult. But I think the fundamental DNA came from my mom. And I thank her for that, because it's kept me going. It's re-energized me when I was down. It's made me mad. It's driven me to achieve results, because that's the other piece. I mean, if you're not getting results, so we talk about risk. The fact of the matter is, when I really think about it, Mike, I talk about risk, but I'm not so sure I was risky, in the sense that I did things that customers cared about. I did things that people cared about in a different way. I achieved them. And so, how can you actually be really risky when you're actually driven to do what people care about in business? Because they're going to pay you in incredible margins. And I say that's a good thing. So maybe I wasn't all that risky. I was safe on the side of the customers, right? Maybe that's how to look at it.
I think that concept of customer first has largely been lost by most publicly traded corporations. Many years ago, publicly traded companies switched from a customer centric model to a shareholder value model. And
I know.
there are so many case histories that are affecting, that are in the news today, that started in the 70s and 80s. Boeing is a perfect example of that. When they purchased McDonnell Douglas, their management style pretty much took over Boeing, even though Boeing purchased them. And their structure was very shareholder based, not customer centric, and at least from what I've read, and it seems to be bearing out in today's headlines. When shareholder value goes above customer value, then they start making shorter and shorter term decisions, and decisions instead of maybe a 10-year bold, audacious financial plan, they'll come up with how do we achieve a dividend next quarter, and
Yeah.
next month, and maybe next week. And I can't run a company looking, 10 feet in front of me. It's like driving a car, only seeing, a foot past the hood. You can't. You can't go very far. You can't go very fast. You're certainly not going to be very safe. You can't make strategic decisions when you're constantly being controlled by shareholders as opposed to your customers. And I'm a big believer in, if you want to chase something, if you have a goal to improve sales, don't just focus on improving sales, because you will improve sales probably at the cost of something else. To me, revenue, profit, growth, market share, all the different KPIs that we look at are all the results of good decisions, not individually focusing on just one of those things. And that comes from my flying days. When I was training to become a pilot, every pilot will hear this. You do three things at the same time. Anytime you're in the cockpit, in the air, you aviate, navigate, and communicate. You never stop doing those three things. And I think the same can be applied for business. Does that all this resonate with you, or are you a little bit more concentrated on single task goals?
Well, just a couple comments. Yeah, I agree with the sentiment that you're describing of this. I approach it in slightly different ways. First of all, the whole issue of where do you want to take the organization? What do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be shareholder centric or customer centric? Quite frankly, is an issue of leadership because they're both the same. You cannot grow shareholder value without being customer centric. Okay, unless all you want to do is whack away at costs, and that gets back to our previous discussion. And I
Yeah.
agree with you. If you're cost oriented, you're gonna do something that's going to screw your service levels, employee engagement. Sooner or later, bad stuff will happen. And so I think leaders have been getting off lightly. Okay, they've been preaching to the choir. They've been taking a narrative, right, and lining up with it called shareholder value without really understanding what the hell it is. Shareholder value at the end of the day is more oriented towards how you're growing your revenues, right, at reasonable margins than it is anything else. And that breaks down, therefore, into, well, how are you doing that? How are you going to grow your revenues? Right. And that's all about differentiation and the sort of things so far that we've been discussing. In terms of planning, I would take issue with the fact that 10-year plans, other than for bankers, have any worth at all. And let me explain that. I'm an execution guy. Okay, so the sort of process and models that I've built are all about getting the plan just about right and executing it flawlessly. And that leads you to believe in a world that changes so chaotically and is so unpredictable, it leads you to looking at shorter time frames rather than longer time frames. And so the work I do is based on 24 months. Let's create a strategic game plan, okay, over the next 24 months based on growing revenues, and let's figure out the detail around the tactical implementation steps we're going to execute in order to get there. We will learn whether the strategic direction is right, not a function of pronouncing it, utilizing textbook methodologies and academic this should work principles, because I'm not that kind of a guy, but based on what we actually learn in the field by executing this puppy with real customers, real technology change, real competitors, and real regulations. So I call it's called Head West, Mike. So we're sitting in New York, and the strategic game plan is let's head west. I'm not going to tell you whether we're going to end up in San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Vancouver, because quite frankly, I don't know. And the I don't know will drive me to be innovative and figure it out along the way. But we will figure it out. In 24 months, we will have learned something that we could never have predicted in the beginning, and that is, where are we going to end up? We're going to do fundamentals well. We're going to learn from execution. We're going to engage employees. We're going to do things differently. We're going to hire for goosebumps, not based on standard HR principles. And we'll get there, and we'll look back and go, wow, look at that. Never would have figured that out 24 months ago. The fourth year of a 5-year plan, Mike, never shows up, because all it does is give us permission to delay executing certain things. Oh, well, it didn't work now, but we got year 4 out of year 5 because it's a 5-year plan, or worse, a 10-year plan. We'll get it in year 8. Okay, that's not an execution focused mindset. That's absolutely leadership cop out. And that's one of the biggest issues I have dealing with particularly entrepreneurs, okay, who have been told that you need a 5-year plan. And I keep going, no, you don't. Yeah, I can give you one based on extrapolation and linear regression and all that kind of stuff, because my math background will serve me well. You give that to your banker, but don't you ever believe it's going to work. You don't know it's going to work until you actually start doing stuff and learning and adjusting on the go. And I call it planning on the run. That's one of the things that people have difficulty with, is that whole notion of feeling okay about imperfect, and okay that you don't have all the answers, which is kind of ironic because we don't.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
And so, that's the journey. And unfortunately, we've done too good of a job teaching people from a textbook about philosophies and theories, as opposed to go find somebody with an MBA, i.e., Master in Business Achievement, and do what they say to do, as opposed to somebody with a doctorate in philosophy that's never run $1 billion business in their life. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going. I'm ranting again, Mike. I apologize.
No, no, no. This is all great. There's a couple of
I'm kidding.
takeaways. There's many takeaways I got from this, but one of them that I wrote down was hire for goosebumps. That I love
Yeah.
that. I've never thought about it that way, but that's how we hire. We don't hire based on societals or business, you know, acumen. You know, as an HR department would send it to us or a recruiter would send it to us.
Yeah.
We hire based on the goosebump theory. I love that term. I'm going to share that with my team. We finally have a label for it because people ask, you know, what's your strategy for hiring? I'm like, you don't want to know. It sounds very weird. You know, it's hard to describe. I couldn't write like a hierarchical chart, you know, like a flow chart on how to hire, if then else, because we know when it's right. You know, we just know it. We feel it. We're like, oh my God, this person's do it. You know.
But but
Anyway,
that but that
yeah,
no, hang on a second. Now, this
yeah,
is a really important thing. That exactly what you described is a process. It is a template. The problem is you've been taught that templates, okay, have got like it's sharp edges,
yeah.
right? And they got arrows in them and boxes in them and decision making. That who says that's right? I mean,
You're right.
hiring for Goosebumps is all about trying to discover people who like human beings. And that's expressed in the way they behave and how they make people feel. That's the principle. I use it to hire people into customer service because my logic said, how can I create loyalty and gasp worthy moments for customers if the person serving them hates humans? Right? And we've all run into people like that
Sure.
in the business world, right? They don't have any eye contact. They'd rather be taking inventory, and that's okay, but put them in inventory. Don't put them in charge of your most precious asset called the
Yeah.
customer. So what I had two questions. Okay, you want a model? Here it is. Hiring for Goosebumps. Question number one, Mike, do you like human beings? And I will pause, and you will answer probably well because you know the question, you know the
Yeah.
answer that Roy wants.
Sure, I
You'll
do.
go, sure, I do, Roy. And the next question will be, okay, good. Tell me a story that would prove it. And this is what separates, the human being lover, which I call the HBLs, the human being lover from the phony, right? Because the phony will give you a story that they think you want to hear, but it'll be cold and rough and it'll leave you feeling like a fish, right?
Yeah.
But the person who really gets it, who has human being loving running through their veins, they will tell you a story that is so rich, so emotional, it will leave you with, say it with me, Mike, goosebumps. That's the
Goosebumps.
hiring
Yeah.
for goosebumps thing. And when I got goosies, I hired the person and I taught them the business. You can't teach people to love human beings. You can teach them to grin, right? And we all know what that's called,
Yeah.
but or like answer a phone with a smile in your voice. What the hell does that even mean? But you can't teach them to love people in a way that makes other people feel amazing. And this is a description, okay, of the service experience factor that is missing in business today. When people feel really crummy about an engagement process, you failed miserably. And yet, those same companies will talk about an objective that they have to exceed customer expectations. I mean, how phony is that, right? And it's all over the place. Go check any website. You'll find that sort of claptrap stuff, but they don't follow it up. I used to participate in panel interviews with my direct reports, particularly at the initial stage of this company when we were hiring. And it was me and maybe two or three people on one side, president of the company, and this poor and potential candidate on the other side of the table, right? Pretty intimidating for them. But on the other hand, it showed them that what was important around here is we want to know what's inside you. Okay, I can teach you how to actually formulate an internet strategy, right, and execute it through the front lines. But I can't teach you to love people, and that's what I really want, right? First and foremost, because that's the genesis of teamwork, employee engagement, customer experience, marketing to what people crave, not need. It's a fundamental driver of growth. And so I thought, and people thought I was nuts. In fact, the HR guy says, Roy, seriously, what are you talking about hiring for Goosebumps? I mean, where do you get that stuff? And I go, I don't know, but it works. I just gave it a name. And by the way, the people in my organization loved it. because it appealed to the right side of their brain, where the emotion and passion, they knew what we were trying to do. And in fact, it got to the point where I'd be stopped out when I was wandering around a workplace, and people would stop me and say, Roy, okay, I've got somebody that is really good at creating goosebumps. Would you like to meet them? I go, yeah, bring them on. And so it became part of the cultural language of the organization. It was amazing. I just got goosebumps. Sorry, Mike.
Well, no, I did too. And as soon as you said hire for goosebumps, I got goosebumps just hearing that, because I'm like, that's finally I can say in a few words our hiring strategy.
There you
And
go.
and by the way, I'm a big believer that we hire our customers, we choose our customers just as much, maybe if not more, than our customers choose us. And we I can apply that goosebump theory or label to how we go after certain types of customers, because our philosophy is we want to love our customers. We want to love the people we work with. We want to have joy, which sounds very Pollyannish, but we want to
No, I
have
get it.
joy, from 8 to 5, not just after 5 and on weekends, right? We spend most of our working, our awake hours, at work with our work family. We want to love them. We want to look forward to going to work. We want to love our customers. It makes otherwise challenging moments a lot easier if they love us and we love them, and you can work through the small things, right? But the way we marketed in our early days was so obnoxious that we attracted lots of trolls and toxic customers and good customers. We were fishing with an extremely wide net. We were just trolling the waters and catching everything, and good fish, bad fish, all that. When we selectively put the right hook, to continue that kind of semi-poor analogy, when we put better hooks in the water and we fished in selected areas and we knew exactly what we were looking for, we attracted the type of customer that we put out as we behaved ourselves, and it just changed our world. And we have goosebumps when certain customers approach us, because we would love to work with you, just for bragging rights. We love the work you do. We're admirers of the work you do. And we're in the electronics industry, so many of our customers are known. They're known brands to the world, and I think that same approach goes to a lot of things, maybe even vendors and all of that.
For
Your
sure.
your brand, the Roy Osing brand and book centers around "Be Different or Be Dead," which I love that title. As I said in the intro, I want to know where the confidence came from to name a book that, particularly a business-oriented book. What does being different really mean in business today? You've touched on some of it, but define what different is. Contrast that with how most businesses are not different.
Yeah. So let me flip that around and say, I'm really, really quite disappointed with the mediocrity in business today on the subject of defining why people should do business with them as opposed to their competitors. And so my observation is, in spite of the fact that customers are yielding more power today than ever, that regulations are more restrictive than ever, the technology is changing more rapidly than ever. In spite of that, organizations have a difficult time carving out a unique position for themselves in the market. And so what they end up doing is using concepts of unique selling propositions, which aren't unique at all, as intellectually dishonest as far as I'm concerned. Like, we're the best, we're better, we're number one, we're the market leader. You just go look at any website and you'll see words like this. I've coined them claptrap. Those are claptrap expressions that mean absolutely nothing to customers. When you say you're the best, Okay, well, I love me. Who do you love? I mean, if there's not a narcissistic expression that's any worse than the best, I mean, I've not seen it yet. And so what you have is you've got a lot of companies, first of all, copying others, like they believe that if it worked for company A, it'll work for me. That's one issue. Claptrap, like the better, best, and so forth, is another. Aspirational thinking is another piece that's horrendously difficult, where you have people who actually, like, they will offer a reason to buy, like they're in the business to save the home planet. I'm not going to tell you who that is. You'll probably figure that out. But there's so many in that category. Like, they're aspiring to do something and they use that as a competitive claim, which is nonsensical, okay, as opposed to driving it down to the details. And lastly, narcissism typically creeps in and it's all about them and their view of themselves. And so what occurred to me is that the solution, okay, to this dilemma is to try and create a strategy where companies and businesses and people are the only ones that do what they do. And it led me to develop what I call the only statement. The only statement is a really simple statement. It says, we are the only ones that. And I've created kind of like an engagement process around how to actually do this as part of my strategic game planning process. The beauty of the only statement is you can look at it and you know whether it's right or it's BS. It's binary. It either exists or it doesn't exist. And it requires you to really understand the customer. It's not about what you think you're unique at. It's about how are you unique in a way that the target customers you're trying to get at care about. And so it requires you to, as you said earlier, which I agree 100%, you got to spend a lot of time on what I call the who do you want to serve. Those are your target customers that you think have got the latent potential to drive your growth goals. And then you dive into that for what they crave, not what they need. The big difference here. Everybody plays to needs. Very competitive. You get driven to commodities, tons of competitors, and it's very price sensitive. The craving space is based on emotional triggers. Okay, and so when you are dealing in a market that is driven by emotional reasons, typically today it's relatively price insensitive, and there's few competitors because nobody's playing in that game. Okay, so once you understand who you're going to serve and what they crave, you use that as the basis for creating your only statement, and you develop it. Okay, and there's some I can't put my hands on them right now, but I've written, there's all over all my web pages and so forth, my blogs, is how to actually do this. And it really works kind of cool because it forces people to think about their business differently. Like, I did some work with a landscaper a couple of months ago, and we were working on his only statement. And he said, Roy, I'm not unique at anything. I just cut grass. And I said, well, what if we thought about your business in a different way? And so we went through the process, right? Who are you going to serve? What do they crave? And from that analysis came the declaration that they were the only personal service provider in the property development business. Property development defined a certain way, right? As somebody that actually did landscaping and had access to resources that could paint houses and do plumbing and everything else. So we broadened it. So the solution to all of that stuff is trying to be the only one that does what you do. Treat it as a draft. Never finalize it, because it will always change. It will always change because the bad guys are going to do something when they see how cool you are and how you're working at it. So you need to be able to shift a little bit. I'm not saying throw out the core idea, but be able to shift as you go. If there's one piece of my work that has really seemed to resonate with people, it's that. How can I be the only one that does what I do? Now, you will go back. You and I both remember the Grateful Dead, correct?
Oh, of course.
This is going, of course, back in the come on, the most successful touring band in history was the Grateful Dead. They had a lead guitar player called Jerry Garcia, who happened to be just amazing at business. He came up with it with the expression, which I've grabbed onto when I started working on this only work. His view was, you don't want merely to be the best of the best. You want to be the only one that does what you do. And the Grateful Dead personified that.
Yeah.
In a world, right, that were clamoring over rights to copy, he built stands for his customers, fans, to actually record their music. Which, when you think about it, you go, well, what was wrong with that? Well, everybody thought there was a lot wrong with that at the time, but
Yeah.
it was quite clever. So, be the only
That's how
one
they
that
that's how
does
they
what you
formed Deadheads. They and
exactly right.
to this day, to this day, if some of the band is still performing, or if there's even a tribute band, the Deadheads show up. They
I
they
know.
they show up in their 1968 Beatles and vans, and the smell of pot just emanates through the air, and
It's
these are all
awesome.
like people like our age and older that are like corporate executives now, and we put on our old 70s high school tie-dye
Yeah.
t-shirts and
T-shirts,
bell
man.
bottoms and all that
Yeah.
stuff, and follow them around the country. They're
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
loyal.
Yeah. Well, just for your listeners and viewers, there's a book out called "The Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead," and I would recommend, anybody read this thing. It is so down to earth. It is so meaningful and simple to actually do something with. It's a textbook that I would say replace Marketing 101 with. It's called "The Marketing Lessons of the Grateful Dead," and the dude that did it, I can't remember his name, obviously spent a lot of time studying the Grateful Dead and had good insights, and it was wonderful, just wonderful.
And for my audience, I'll say this again as we wrap up, but I'll throw it in now for my audience who would like to get links to both Roy's book and Be Different or Be Dead, and one of the books he recommends, Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. I will have those in the show notes, so you can look at that later and get access to that. You've written about the idea of executing first and planning second, which, help me out here. I'm having a hard time with that one. I mean,
Well,
so
yeah,
many times we did, instead of ready, aim, fire, we used to do fire, ready, aim, and we'd fire and then recalibrate, and then fire and then recalibrate, and so that struck me as counterintuitive. And some of the most important lessons, Roy, I have
yeah,
learned all started off as counterintuitive. So I love counterintuitive advice. I gravitate toward that because it has proven itself over and over and over again in my
yeah.
personal and professional life. Why does execution matter more than strategy?
Well, it comes back to the fact that we spend so much time trying to perfect the direction that we're going, okay, and defining the end game, that we actually don't spend any time at all, in a relative sense, on how we're going to get there. So the notion that I learned really early is precision, okay, in terms of the end game, doesn't exist. It can't exist because it requires you to be able to predict the future. And God knows, in these days, that's impossible to do. You can't even predict what's going to go on Friday. And so I said, why are the academics promulgating methodologies where 90% of your time is on the plan and 10%, if that, on how you're going to execute it? And so I flipped the paradigm. I said, look, at the most realistic way of getting to where you eventually will get to, whether that's right or wrong, you will learn along the way, is to spend 20% of your time on the plan, get it just about right, head west, which we kind of alluded to earlier, and then spend 80% to 90% of your time working on the detailed tactics that are going to get you there. Again, within a 24-month horizon. All right. This isn't a 10-year planning process. This is a 24-month strategic game plan. It's called a game plan because it's execution focused. So execute first, plan second is my way of sort of communicating that. Look, at the emphasis in terms of performance of yourself in your career and an organization is a function of not what you think. It's a function of what you do, how many tries you've made, how many times you failed. It's all about that. And have you learned along the way? And it's simply, I think, unethical for people to preach that there actually is a blue ocean out there, okay, where success is founded on finding an uncontested marketplace. when 99% of the world exists in red oceans, okay, where there's intense competition and powerful customers, like we talked about earlier. Our jobs should be to help those people in red oceans, right? In a practical sense, to survive and thrive, and to actually pontificate, okay, that a perfect strategy exists and that's what you should follow is disingenuous. It's intellectually dishonest. So my way of countering that is to hit back hard on execution. I want to see an execution-oriented plan. Execute what you think is going to be right first. Okay, if you have time, and you will as you execute, then you can refine the plan. But don't spend the time up front because it's a waste. And by the way, this is one of the biggest issues entrepreneurs have. They spend way too much time up front when they should be moving their feet, talking to customers, getting on with trying stuff, right? Figuring out how they're going to be different. Okay, getting rid of benchmark. I call it gargling Google. Mike, here's another concept for you. Gargling Google is a travesty. And most business leaders, what do they do when they're facing a challenge? They Google it and figure out what somebody else is doing it,
Right.
find best in class, and then copy it. Are you kidding me? How can you be innovative when you do stuff like that, right? So you got to get away from that stuff and just start doing stuff.
Kind of along that same thread, how can smaller or newer entrepreneurs stand out when they don't have the resources of larger competitors?
Yeah, and it's really, I would say that's not the question. What I would say is, what's your strategy first? Because nobody does that. They skip over that, right? And automatically they're frustrated by what they believe is an insurmountable problem relative to resource development. And I say, well, let's wait until we get there. I want to see you put in the work up front. How big do you want to be? Who do you want to serve and what do they crave? How are you going to compete and win by being the only one that does what you do? Let's do that work first. Okay. And it's focused. So I'm not convinced that it's a resource problem. Okay. It's a precision
Effort
and
problem.
a discipline problem
Yeah.
to nail that first and then let's go. Because I find it ends up to be, Mike, too much noise that prevents people from doing the right thing. It's like all of a sudden they're going, oh my God, I'm never going to have the resources to be unique. That's bullshit. Okay, it is. Let me tell you, it is. I got a landscaper who cut grass, grow his business over 150% the last 2 years. Okay, he doesn't have access to millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of capital. Okay, what he did is refocused his energies, right, on the parts that paid off. So that's where I want to see the discipline. I really do.
What do leaders get wrong when they try and build a culture of boldness or innovation? Say they say, okay, I've listened to Roy. That makes sense to me. We're going to be bold and innovate. You know,
Yeah, it's like context. Like there's no silver bullets here, right? Everybody wants to, wow, let's get, what is the one thing that you did? There wasn't one thing, right? What is the single most important lesson you learned? No, there wasn't one. There was a whole bunch. What was the single thing you screwed up? No, there wasn't one. There was a. So all I would say is, you need to buy into the concept of be different or be dead. You need to buy into the fact, okay, the single most important driver in your performance is how are you different in a way that people care about. Let's start with that, and let's start working with that. And there are ways of doing it. I've said I've created a planning process. By the way, I mean, it's a 48-hour process, Mike. So, check in at 7 o'clock on day one. And at the end of day two, we have your strategic game plan and it's ready to go. Now, okay, everybody out there, tell me you don't have 48 hours to work on your business, right? Tell me you're too busy to take 48 hours and do the right thing, right? And so I shame people into doing it, quite frankly, because that's where we are. So you want to be audacious. You don't start out with that as a goal. You start out with a goal of let's create a strategic game plan that is meaningfully different and establishes us as the only one that does what we do. Now, how we achieve it, of course, is the process that you go through. What are the specific objectives we're going to be looking at? Okay. What are the levers that we can pull? But it, in many cases, comes down to one simple, real thing, and that is how are you going to create a feeling response from the people that you're going to serve in a way that nobody else does? Because I believe that feelings, it ain't about the product working. Everybody expects the product to work, and when you actually deliver something to work, they don't jump up and down and kiss you on the cheek. They go, okay, good. Now what are you going to do for me lately? And so it gets into that whole realm of how do you feel about doing business with a customer, or with a business. So don't start out with the notion. The audaciousness comes in the ways that you choose to achieve your objectives. The hiring for Goosebumps was an audacious move built to find people that liked people. The strategic game planning approach is audacious because nobody, it's not necessarily because nobody else does it and they don't, but it yields results so quickly, right? And it builds on things like discontinuity, disruption, goosebumps, and all those kind of things. So you approach it that way as opposed to thinking about it as an end state.
You talk about weaponizing uniqueness. What does that look like in practical terms for a founder or a startup team?
Yeah. So what you do once you have your only statement, you've got the most powerful weapon in the world. Okay, because nobody else has it. So now the issue is, how are you going to put it to work? How are you going to execute around your only statement? That would be the tangible outcome. So we are the only ones who, you take that and you break it down into what do we mean by that in more specific terms, and then you start to execute around that and execute around that. In essence, it becomes your sort of elevator pitch. And somebody says, well, what do you do? And well, we're the only ones who, and that automatically gets a conversation going. And so, and always be ready, okay, for a shot to come across your bow from somebody that sees what you're doing. They like what you're doing. They're threatened by what you're doing, and they want to respond. And that's okay. Because as I said before, the only statement, your only position is always a draft. The work, Mike, is never done. It's, you keep it alive, you keep it organic, and you just shape it with how customers change, how competitors change, etc. But the work really is in getting that position and then executing it, and executing it. I used to involve customers in this kind of stuff, and I'd say, "Look, this is what we think our only statement. What makes us unique? Are we blowing smoke or smoking something? What do you think?" And first of all, they loved actually being asked the question.
Sure. They're part
And
of a focus group, really. Yeah.
absolutely, and they give us all sorts of insights in terms of what we had to do differently.
For entrepreneurs who hesitate to take risks, who are just inherently risk adverse, or who might relate to the idea of being reluctant, what's your advice for moving from caution to courage?
Well, again, it's at the risk of repetition here. I mean, it is far more risky to not have your feet moving than to have your feet moving. And I'm also a firm believer in baby steps, not giant leaps. Okay, there are things that you can do, and I'm not going to say to minimize risk because that's the wrong term. It would be to increase your comfort level with uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay, the strategic game planning process that I just referred to is such an example. You can start that right now. It's so easy. The process, 3 questions. Answer the 3 questions. You have a game plan that you can now start to execute. It's built around the execution element. It's not built around an investment model. It's not like the things that people would typically associate with riskiness. It's based on some pretty simple things that speak to revenue growth, target customers, what people lust for and desire, not need, and how are you going to be unique. Those principles, if you address those, how could you possibly be undertaking a risk that is out of proportion to the benefits? It's the right way to start, and it's simple. And you can get your head around. It's not, you don't have to read a textbook other than mine or go to my blogs. I've been blogging this stuff since '09, so there's lots on my website. And I guess the other thing I would say, guys, is be kind to yourself, right? Don't expect overnight stuff to start happening, right? So be patient. And I know it's hard to do in a world that's changing so quickly, but if you are, you will see the benefits sooner than the people who are trying stuff. I call it chasing yummy, Mike. Yummy incoming for me is just chasing stuff. Oh, that looks sexy. That's cool. Let's go chase AI. Let's go chase social media, predictive modeling. You get so busy with activity without meaning that you never really achieve anything. And maybe that's where risk comes from. You're chasing stuff. Don't chase. Bear down on what's important. And if we can help anybody, ask us.
Great advice. Tell me what your company does today. Who are you, not who specifically, but what types of clients do you have? What services or what products? I say products.
Yep.
I don't think you're shipping boxes of stuff to people, but what do you offer your clients? What's the goal of the company?
So my company is me. It comes under. I refer to myself as be different or be dead, or brilliance for business. The fundamental idea is to share knowledge. Um, I'm not the biggest altruist in the world, but I would like to see the conversation changing out there, away from theoretical approaches to anything into proven and practical things that actually work in the real world. And that's a huge issue for businesses and leaders that are trapped today in textbook thinking. And so I do a lot of this kind of work, sharing the stuff that worked in hopes that I could change the conversation and behavior. And if asked, because I don't go chase it, if asked, I do consulting work where I actually help people develop strategic game plans, whether it be I've done them through Zoom calls. In person is more fun for me, but just finding a way to give a little bit back and try and help people in a way that they don't have to take out 6 mortgages on their business, and they don't have to take 6 weeks away from their business. So get stuff that is meaningful. You can trust it. It's not expensive. You can get it done and you can get on. And so I try and do that whenever people ask. But to be honest, I've got 4 grandchildren, the oldest of which is 24, and she's a manager of a retail business here. And I'm fortunate enough, Mike, that every once in a while she asks me questions about business, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to help out. And so I'm pursuing it more that way. But every morning I get up, I write a lot. My drive to change the conversation in the way we've been discussing is huge, and I don't see it dissipating anytime soon.
That's amazing. Last question, Roy. How did you how did you define success when you first started your career, and how do you define it today?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Never been asked that. And I actually have the answer. I remember as a very young professional in the telecommunications business having this objective. And don't forget, telecoms in the day were highly populated by engineering kind of culture and engineers, and I wasn't one of them. And so I was kind of like on the outside of that anyways. My objective was to be vice president of marketing by the time I was 39 years old. Now that may, to a lot of people these days, seem pretty old, but in our days, that was a pretty audacious goal without any idea how to get there. I did not have a clue. Upon reflection, I'm convinced that having that audacious goal, I just got goosebumps, having that audacious goal did have an impact on the decisions I made and what I did along the way. And so, yeah, that was it. And it, 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 it took on a life, I think, that was based on relating to people and execution, execution, execution. Do it, do it. I was kind of a utility guy in the business. Whenever there was a problem, they would always say, "Hey, get Roy in here. He can do this thing relatively quickly, fix it, and whatever." So I was kind of called upon as a utility infielder, and in many situations, and surely to God, we had lots of them, right, as any business does. So, been very fortunate, and I strategically meandered my way through the organization, learning, helping, and I was rewarded for that. And I'm thankful, and yeah, I'm thankful. and grateful.
Well, I'm thankful and grateful for you being my guest on this show today. One of the great takeaways I get, one of the great benefits I get, almost like stealing candy from babies, it just comes to me, is I get to talk to very inspirational business leaders and entrepreneurs and hear firsthand their journey. And, many of my audience have been here from day one, so they get the same level of advice and insight. Some of my audience, tuned in a little later, they get a few. I get all of them. So I consider myself very lucky to be able to sit down for an hour or so and talk to people like yourself. And, part of me almost wishes not enough. I don't wish this enough to actually execute on this plan because I'm past all that now. I would like to think I'm happy with my business. I've had it for 33 years. I'm not going to start another one and start all over. But if I did, I think it would soar so much faster than my first business did, because I feel like I've gotten 4 or 5 PhDs now, equivalents, and by talking to people like yourself and others that have done the journey like I have and made the mistakes like I have and learned from it like I have, but from so many different perspectives than beyond just mine. So I feel very blessed to be able to sit here in this chair, stare at this camera, and see you in my teleprompter and be able to exchange ideas and hear what worked for you. For my audience who would like to find out more information about Roy's company, if you are watching this on YouTube, just look down here and you'll see information on how to access Roy's website. Also, I'll have a link to Roy's book, Be Different or Be Dead, as well as the book, one of the books that he recommended, which was Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. I will probably get that one myself, as well as Roy's book. And also on Roy's website, you can access his blogs and all sorts of stuff like that. So lots of valuable information on Roy's website. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, then when it's safe to do so, don't do it while you're driving. Pull over and look at the show notes on your favorite podcast app, and all that information will be there as well. Roy, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been very insightful and inspirational. You gave me a few goosebumps along the way, so thanks for doing that.
My pleasure, Mike. I'm grateful of the fact that you had me.
Well, I'm grateful you're here. Thanks, Roy. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. A very special thanks to Roy Osing for being my guest on the show. We've been very busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe and get notified when new episodes drop. And one favor, if you don't mind, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe. Those 2 simple clicks really help us expand our reach. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, I'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com to apply or recommend a guest. You can also reach me directly at mike@reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com. And of course, one quick shameless plug. If you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and as an audiobook on Audible and Amazon. That's it for the shameless plug. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until next time, be unstoppable. I'll see you again soon.